And in building this team, assessing them, where do you start from now in just getting better in what you saw from last year, some key points in this year, in how you want to build this team even further?
Yeah, there's no question about that. That's the one expectation I have, is for us to absolutely relentlessly go after our improvement. And some of that is skill related, some of that is coaches defining what specific scheme, what things are we adding, what are we taking out, what do we need to start doing, what do we need to stop doing. And if we continue to do that, not just with one player or five players, but with everybody, coaches included, that's when the collective group rises. And that's honestly what we're going to chase really, really hard.
Hey, Lance, in further development of this team, where did you see right now that this team could get better, or what some of the main focuses going into this draft?
Well, we have a lot of free agents, and we only have 47 players on our roster, so we have to look at everything again. We have to really address our entire roster again, and to say that this is one specific area that's more important than another would be inaccurate. Obviously, we like a lot of what we had last year, and we were excited about that team, and we did some good things, and we'll try to get a lot of that core back. But to me, we're addressing the whole roster every time we go through this, and with where we are numbers wise, we're looking at everything.
Donna Hopkins Pro Football Plus out here at the NFL Combine. Here with me is Lake Lewis. And Lake, we got a chance to talk to Coach Quinn today. How do you see this Washington team moving into this coming year, and what are some key areas that you think that they need to plug in?
Well, I think they need to get better in the trenches, and that's got to be the blueprint because of what they went up against with the Philadelphia Eagles, and we saw what the Eagles did to Kansas City Chiefs and did to Washington themselves. If you can't win in the trenches, you're not going to win football games, and I think Washington, having finally got the answer to their decades-old question of who's going to be a franchise quarterback for them, they have that answer now, so you've got to protect him. And then you had the injury to Sam Cosmi, so that was your best offensive lineman. He was a fringe Pro Bowl player that was on the cusp of making his first Pro Bowl. So with him being out, you have to find someone that can maybe replace him. So I do think, the blueprint's got to be you've got to get better in the trenches. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they have there's a reason why John Allen's probably not going to be back with them. They're going to grant him permission to seek a trade, which means that he won't be back. So now a lot of these guys here at the Combine, a lot of these defensive linemen, they take precedent because you're going to look at them. You're going to see, can they be a guy that Washington may go with? And I think, again, when you look at what the Eagles did, being able to just generate a tremendous pass rush with just four down linemen and no blitzing or anything like that, it changes the way you can play defense. It changes the way offenses can't maneuver the football against you because now you have seven, D-backs basically in the backfield. So if you're Washington, you've got to get better in the trenches.
Yeah, talking about getting better in the trenches, this class this year is heavy as far as the defensive side of the ball, and that is good for Washington because that's the area that they need to look at as far as edge rushers. That Mason Graham is one of the guys.
Mason won't be there for Washington.
We knew that he wouldn't be there, but that's one guy that's on there.
Mason, to me, probably would be the first defensive lineman off the board from Michigan. He's a big monster guy.
320.
Yeah, but he's mobile. He can run. He's a freak of nature. But he's a top 12 pick, I think, in this draft. There's a guy named Walter Nolan.
He was on my list next.
Okay, and we spoke with him earlier, but he's a guy that's very similar to Jerzon Newton in stature. So you don't want two Johnny Newtons because you do need a big monster guy. So the guy that I spoke with, and actually asked him if Washington spoke with him, and he said not yet, but he definitely would be excited about playing for Washington. This guy named Deion Walker out of Kentucky, and he's 6'7", 340 pounds. So that's one of the guys that I think you need to keep your name, his name in your mind because he might be there for Washington. He's a second-round grade, maybe third. He could fall to the third, but I think he's a second-round grade. And perhaps Washington takes a look at him. He's a guy that's going to need some work. I mean, he's a good player, really dominant at times, but then there's some times he might take a play off or two, which most of these young guys are going to hear these kind of, cons saying about them. But as far as the pros, the guy's just a freak of nature. He's a great athlete, and at 6'7", 340 pounds, he could be that space eater Washington's defensive line doesn't have.
So I think the defensive front is where you start at, but over on the other side of the ball, the offensive line is another area of need because they're in need of a tackle still. And like you said, you know, this team, when you look at it as far as offensive lineman, Will Campbell, LSU, is one of the guys on there, but he'll be gone. But some of the other ones, Simmons, Kevin Banks, and some of the other ones. But how do you see the offensive line? Because we know that Cosme, like you said, is coming off that injury, and you know how that goes as far as when you hurt a knee. But across the line, this offensive line succeeded what we believed that they would do, but we still know that in order to protect your quarterback, giving him the time that they need to build that offensive line tackle position, but I need about 2 or 3 players there. How do you see that side of the ball and some of the guys that I have on this list that may be there or may not be there?
Yeah, I mean, I think a guy like Josh Simmons from Ohio State, you know, he's a really good football player. I don't know if he falls to 29, but I think if some things go the way they could go in the first round because teams picking for need or more of the edge rushers come off the board early or something like that, he could be that tackle that's sitting there, and he's such a really good player that you may have to take him and move a guy like Brandon Coleman, who you drafted to be your tackle, and at times played well at tackle, but most of his career in college at TCU, he was a guard. Maybe he may be more suited at this point right now to play guard in the NFL if you can get a Josh Simmons, who comes out with a far better grade than Brandon Coleman did last year. So those are things that you have to keep in mind. But, again, when you have a team in your division that won a Super Bowl and won it in a dominant fashion, you're not in a position to be choosy and say, you know, I got a guy at that position already. I don't need to upgrade. Anywhere you can upgrade your roster, even if it happens to be, if you can get a guy that's better than Jaden Daniels, you have to look at that. Obviously, there is no one out there like that. That's not, you know, a 6-7 year veteran already.
Yeah.
So the point is that everything else outside of Jaden and Terry, to me, are expendable as far as upgrades. And I think, you know, and I mean that on the offensive side of the ball. I even think if, you know, there's a kid from Miami, a tight end that I really like quite a bit, if he's sitting there, you may have to contemplate doing that because Zach Ertz probably has 1 more year left in him. Ben Sennett's young, didn't really take the leap that I thought that they thought that he was going to take, and they still are high on him, but you can never have enough tight ends in the NFL. So there's a lot of things that this team has to shore up, but I'm confident that they'll get it done because I'm confident in you know, and Adam Peters and Dan Quinn and what they're doing.
Defensive line, of course, has to start there. Offensive line has to start there. Those are my 2 starting areas. But this Washington team also need another receiver outside of Terry, that number 2 receiver, even though Washington said there's no such thing as number 1, number 2, but they need another big-time receivers. And let's talk about the running game. This is not, to me, a short up position either, because when you talk about a Saquon Barkley and a Derrick Henry, you measure your running back field back there. Can this Washington team move forward with McNichols, Brian Robinson, and Austin Eggler, or do they need to be looking at another running back? How do you see your key areas that you think this Washington team, like I said, mine's is defensive line, offensive line, number 2 receiver, running back. That's where I'm starting at, and maybe another corner.
Yeah, I think they definitely need to upgrade the running back room. They don't have a home run threat at running back. Brian Robinson's a good running back in the NFL, and he's shown production, but it hasn't been in a dominant fashion, and it hasn't been in a fashion where he can make things happen if everything else isn't working around him, and that's what a home run back is. A home run back is like Saquon. You know, you get him the ball and he'll just make some things happen, jumping over guys or cutting back against the grain and taking one to the house. Jahmyr Gibbs from Detroit's another guy that does those things, changes your whole dynamic of your offense. So I think if Washington can get themselves a guy like, say, Travion Henderson from Ohio State, you know, a lot of people don't know this, but Travion Henderson's also a Virginia kid, you know, so probably grew up, you know, rooting for Washington. You know, that would be a nice thing for them as well. He's a big back. You know, it's kind of, when I say big, he's stout, but he's got blazing 4.3 40 speed. and he showed that at Ohio State on numerous occasions this year. And he's also probably one of the best pass blocking backs in the league, in this combine, in this draft that'll be coming up. So that's good to protect Jaden. So you need something like that. And then I think Washington absolutely has to address the wide receiver room. I'm not so much in love with the whole T. Higgins thing. I think you can get some other guys that could work out for them. I think DK Metcalf might be a guy from Seattle that might need a change of scenery, and it could be eerily similar to when A.J. Brown was in Tennessee.
Yeah.
And, left and went to Philadelphia, and you see what he is now, because the irony is both those guys played in college together at Ole Miss. Imagine guarding both those guys on the sides, but he's a physical guy like that, and sometimes a change of scenery and also having a dog throwing you the ball
Makes a difference.
It makes a difference. And then you have a real true number one on the other side of you. I think Washington could mirror Philadelphia as far as Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown with Terry McLaurin and naturally DK Metcalf if something like that were to help.
One thing's for sure is whatever players that we're talking about, that we're not talking about, they have to fit the culture here in Washington. Lake Lewis and I'm out here at the NFL Combine. We get to see the players go through the skill sets tomorrow. The defensive linemen and I think the linebackers are tomorrow. And two areas that I'm one area, the defensive line. But again, Lake, thanks for sitting down to chat, giving us your knowledge about what you see. I don't know how right he is, but he must. I'm going to let him live with that one. You hear that. But again, Donna Hopkins Pro Football Plus out here at the NFL Combine as the Commanders are on the clock.